Hey everyone. So in this video, we're going to talk about Iran's strategy at this point in the war and going forward, and what we should be expecting in the coming weeks ahead from their behavior. This has come up in some of the other recent videos, so there might be some repetition here, but I thought it was important to make a video about this and also to take us back to what was being said by the Americans in the days right before the war started in February, what was coming out of the Trump administration. And I'm also going to, this isn't for the sake of patting myself on the back, but I am going to read to you from an opinion piece that I wrote before the war started in February. And I've quoted it periodically in the past, but it bears going through it because it could have been written today and it would have been exactly the same thing. And I'm not saying this to say, hey, look how spot on I was, but it is worth saying, look how spot on I was. If you watch this channel, if you've been watching this channel since early in the war, before it, you know that what I've laid out here in terms of what to expect from Iran's behavior has been accurate all the way through from the beginning. We're going to go through that and talk about where we are. General Jack Keane said some amazing things in this clip I'm going to show you. And what was very satisfying to me is that point by point, what he was saying was confirming. It was confirming what I have been arguing on this channel in recent days. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull that up. Here we go. Here is General Jack Keane. Just a few minutes of this.
And with that, we bring in retired General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General Keane, great to have you with us this morning. Let's start with what President Trump said about, sort of eyeing what's going on and putting more of a focus on economic pressure and believing that over time that will force them to the table and force an outcome that is favorable to the United States. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think when you take a look at the evidence, we've been at it 4 months now. We went to a ceasefire on April the 7th, largely because the Iranians shut down the Straits of Hormuz, and they were willing to negotiate about that very subject. And then we imposed a naval blockade on April the 13th. And obviously we were trying to put economic pressure on them as well. So we've been at this for 4 months over the Straits of Hormuz and applying economic pressure. And now we're in a diplomatic phase with them with two issues on the table: Straits of Hormuz opening up, and also the nuclear enterprise, and that's being kicked down the road for negotiations. I think at times we underestimate where the Iranians really are in terms of where their head is. And we have a tendency to look at them in terms of what is the impact of the blockade doing to the economy? How much money are they losing every single day, every single month? Where is their currency in terms of its value? What's their inflation rate? These are all norms that we look at ourselves, and we look at them and say, my, this is absolutely devastating to them. At some point, they're going to fold their hand. But you got to understand where this regime is really coming from, the people who are running it. They have an ideology that they're holding to. They absolutely believe right now that they have the upper hand. I know there's people that don't want to admit that, but that's where the Iranians are. I'm not saying that's where they are. I don't believe it myself, but it's irrelevant. They believe it. They believe the Straits of Hormuz is a strategic asset, and they are not going to bargain that away. Even if they gave in to the concessions we want them to make over the Straits, we already have evidence that they won't comply with it, because 2 presidents signed the deal, and days later, the Iranians didn't comply with it. So where they are, they will not give up the Straits of Hormuz unless we take it back by force. No amount of economic pressure on them, I think, will bend them to do that. They don't care about the economic peril that their people are suffering from. That's the reality of what we're facing. And here's the other thing that's...
Okay, before we get to the other thing, because this was so spot on. Listen to what he said here. He said, look, we measure the damage that we're causing them in, we're looking and, because she asked him about Trump saying, and he said it to Axios, it was quoted yesterday, that, we're looking at at what we're doing to them economically. And, let me pull up the piece here. I'll pull it up here. because here's the piece in Axios. Trump to Axios, we're low-keying it with Iran, right? We're only semi-negotiating with them. We're watching Iran with huge inflation, the fact that they have no money. Iran's in very bad shape economically, has no money to pay its troops. The U.S. naval blockade has exacerbated the Iranian regime's economic crisis, Trump said. In other words, Trump is touting the fact that we're causing them so much damage economically, and that's how we measure our success, and we see victory. And what he's saying here is what I've been saying all along. That is not going to bring the regime down. That is not going to solve the problem. That's not going to open the Strait. Here's what he's saying. Forget about bringing the regime down. That's not your goal. Your goal is to open the Strait of Hormuz. Here's what he said. They see holding the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic asset, meaning that they cannot surrender it. It's existential for them. This is a strategic asset for them. And therefore, they are not going to surrender control of the Strait of Hormuz. They might agree in some interim, very short-term way to allow ships through just to show that they control it and make Trump feel like it's open and then shut it down again. They'll play games. But they're not going, he's saying they cannot surrender the Strait of Hormuz because that's a strategic asset for them. And therefore, no amount of economic pressure that you bring upon them, like it's great that you're doing all this economic pressure, go for it. What Scott Bessent is doing, it's all great, lovely. But it's not gonna cause them to capitulate. Because what they care about, this is what I've been saying, is remaining in power until Trump is out of office. And if they capitulate on the Strait of Hormuz, they have no power whatsoever. They see that as existential, that they have to hold on to the Strait of Hormuz. So what the Trump administration is doing are not the steps that will lead to the only solution to the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, the proxies, all of it. The only solution to those is bringing down the regime. So even if you don't care about regime change, if you care about accomplishing those goals, you have to do that. And all this, and what Jack Keane just said here is that all that economic pressure is not going to solve this problem. He's 100% right. Let's go on with more of Jack Keane.
Going to happen. As we get closer to the midterms, the Iranians, you can see how more aggressive they're becoming in their diplomatic ask of us, almost asking us to surrender in a sense. The second thing is they're going to get more violent because as we get closer to the midterms, they want to create a volatile situation that demonstrates that the administration is not managing the war properly, so that will impact them in the midterm elections. The Iranians have always, multiple administrations, been tuned in to what is happening in America, where is our political resolve. They focus a lot on our people to understand where the American will truly is. So I think their pathway forward, very aggressive diplomatically, they're going to get very aggressive violently as well. Now, President Trump has all the...
Hold on, before we get on to the next thing. This is massive. Listen to what he's saying here. And this is what I said, that he makes a prediction here that's it's somewhat similar to what I said in an earlier video, but goes much farther. What I said was, and I said this in a video I made earlier today, that the Iranians have no interest in coming to a deal, even though they're suffering all this economic hardship with the sanctions and the blockade and the frozen assets, and they can't sell their oil and all of it. Even though they're suffering all of that, they have an interest in keeping the price of oil as high as possible and making this as painful as possible for Trump. And that's why if they open the Strait of Hormuz and the price of oil drops and everything is free flow through the Strait of Hormuz, and that gives Trump a domestic political win, and that helps him win the midterms, that's more of a strategic danger to the Iranians than the economic damage that they're suffering. That's my take on it. So he takes it a step further. Jack Keane took it a step further and said, and it's something I hadn't thought of, but it's kind of obvious, they're going to get more violent. They want escalation. Escalation leads to a spike in oil prices. Escalation makes Trump skittish. Escalation is unpopular among Americans, and it'll hurt Trump if there's escalation, if there's kinetic escalation going on around the time of the election. That'll destroy Trump at the polls. So you better believe that the Iranians are planning it. That's what Jack Keane is saying here. Very astute point, very important point. And this leads me to now go off on this self-serving diatribe where I want to share with you what I wrote before the war started. Okay, this is an op-ed that I wrote on February 18th, 10 days before the Iranians attacked. And the reason I wrote it, I wrote it because of, now I didn't mention him in here. Did I mention him? I don't think I mentioned Steve Woodcock in here, but I wrote it because of this.
We are
okay. Sorry.
I know that we have red lines here from the U.S. How about over with Iran?
The president asked me that this morning, and I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon. So here's what we're prepared to do. And yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
I know that we have red.
Okay. You got that? Now, I didn't actually do it in response to this exact clip. This messaging was coming out of the White House during those days. And my op-ed is actually 3 days prior to this interview. So this is all like a week and a half or so before February 28th, before the attacks began. But because of this messaging coming out of the White House that I started seeing of like, we don't understand, why aren't they surrendering? And the idea then, you remember there was this massive military buildup. And the idea was that with all this buildup, Iran is eventually going to look around and see all of this US military buildup and capitulate and be willing to negotiate. Looking back, it looks so ridiculous. But look what I laid out here. So I laid out what Iran's strategy was. I said, Iran isn't trying to win a war with the US, it's trying to survive Trump. And I wrote this. This is published February 18th, 10 days before the war started. Look what I wrote here. In recent weeks, the Iranian regime has escalated its rhetoric in ways that appear almost suicidal. Iran's spokesmen and diplomats have been talking tough, seemingly taunting the Americans. The same is true right now. You look at it and you go, oh my gosh, you're getting killed. You're getting destroyed. America's so much more powerful. And the Iranians, you see that, the demands they come out with, that America pay reparations, and they're just talking tougher and tougher. They're making their demands to open the Strait of Hormuz even tougher. And and especially look, their demand on the Strait of Hormuz, you saw it at the beginning of that clip, Jack Keane. What was the demand there that they have, to open the Strait of Hormuz? You have to, America has to remove its troops from the region. Or it's coming up in the clip. I mean, they're just getting more and more brazen. So it was the same thing then, right? And there was and then I gave an example of them taunting the Americans. And I said, if Iran's behavior looks reckless right now, that's because we're misreading its goal. The Islamic Republic is not trying to win a war with the United States. It is trying to survive President Donald Trump. Okay, and then I quoted from an article from Iranian state media that was in Persian. It was translated by the Middle East Media Research Institute. And it talked about how the Americans lost the 12-day war, which seems absurd to us. But I point out the way they think. They wrote that since the president's objective was to bring down the regime and he failed, therefore, he lost. And I wrote, the mindset explains everything we're currently seeing from the Islamic Republic. Survival is victory, period. According to this formula, the only strategic question that matters regarding any particular decision is whether or not it will lead to the fall of the regime. Military losses and economic devastation are tolerable. Regime collapse is not. I wrote this paragraph 10 days before the war started. I'm not saying this to crow, but look at every single thing that they're doing right now and how the Americans are misunderstanding it. Well, we're causing them so much economic devastation. At some point, they have to cry uncle. We're destroying all their military. We're destroying their navy. At some point, they have to cry uncle. We're knocking out their bridges. They have to cry uncle. No, they do not. I'm going to read it again. The only strategic question that matters regarding any particular decision is whether or not it will lead to the fall of the regime. Military losses and economic devastation are tolerable. Regime collapse is not. That's what I wanted to show you that I wrote 10 days before the war. And I'm bringing it up because this is where we are right now. This is where we are. The Trump administration it's like we're watching them hopefully learn the lesson, but it's getting riskier and riskier as we get closer and closer to the midterms. Okay, let's watch a little bit more of the great General Jack Keane.
The options in his hands. He can take big military action anytime he wants to shut these guys down. He can do it over a period of days. He can do it in less time than that. He has huge options. He's very much aware of all of that. And we'll see what takes place. I do believe in my own mind that the only way that Iran will meet our demands is we have to force them.
So there.
In other words, you can't be negotiating with them. You have to be driving to victory to get to the point of surrender. That's it. That's what he's saying. Once you're negotiating with them, there's a give and take. You've lost. They're never going to surrender. They're never going to give America what it wants, because they want us for the negotiation to go on and on and on while they escalate and escalate as we get closer to the midterms. That's what they want. And looks like they're on the road to it.
There are questions about our ability to do that militarily. You've certainly read all of these stories about missiles, about what's being perhaps poached from the Asian and Russian and all of the other places that we have very serious military concerns. What's your reaction to that? What do you say to that, to those stories, General Keane?
Well, I do have some knowledge, and I'm absolutely confident that the United States has a greater capability now than we had when we began the war on February the 28th. We've moved more assets into the region. We have more offensive capability. We have strengthened the defensive capability that's out there. Our allies in the region that Iran would want to retaliate against in terms of their oil and gas infrastructure, I mean, the truth be known, the Saudis and the UAE have more Patriot batteries in their country than we have protecting our people in the Middle East. To give you a sense of the scale of what they have. Admiral Cooper is visiting all these countries, and if they need to be strengthened, he's willing to help them, just like we have been helping the Israelis. Israelis came to us before the 12-day war and said, we need your help to help us defend against Iranian missile salvos. And we have, and quite effectively. So, yes, I mean, are there challenges? I think we get things mixed up. There are challenges in replacing the stockpile that we're using. That is a major issue, and that's a public issue, and you can see the Congress is very much into it, and so is the Deputy Secretary of War every single day. He's into that issue. But in terms of being able to prosecute a war with offensive weapons and to be able to defend against the Iranians, we can do that quite effectively.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you caught what he just said there. That was so important. What he said was that we have all the defensive capability to protect those allies. They have more Patriot batteries than the American personnel in the Middle East does. In other words, the opposition that these Arab states, that these Gulf states have to America escalating to the point of bringing down the regime is not coming from the fact that they're afraid of escalation because they're going to get fired upon by Iran. They know that they have the air defenses to fend it off. And they know that America could finish the job. I think that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of America finishing the job. And that goes back to the whole problem with like this game of chicken of dragging things out, and how the Iranians are gaming this, is that even though there's this power struggle going on between Trump and the Iranians and the management of time versus the midterms versus the economic collapse potentially of the Iranian regime, and this whole dynamic, the frustrating thing about it is that it's not like two wrestlers who are locked and it's sort of a stalemate. The Americans have everything they need, as General Keane said. They have everything they need to finish this and to win in a decisive way. So hanging over this whole thing is simply the fact that the Americans don't have the will, or they haven't made the decision to go ahead and actually drive to victory and do the things that are necessary to achieve the objectives that have been laid out from the beginning of the war. And that's what I've been arguing. That's what General Keane is circling around arguing as well. The only way to accomplish the goals that America set out is to do things that will destabilize the regime. And economic pressure, no amount of economic pressure is going to do that. And in fact, as we get closer to the midterms, we're going to see the Iranians escalate more and more. And that's the big danger to look out for. Now, before I let you go, make sure that you are signed up for the webinar, Mamdani's New York City: A Warning to America, with former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, great young, brilliant commentator and writer Shabbos Kestenbaum, Robert Spencer, the prolific author, expert on Islam, and Rabbi Danny Schoenbach, who is an activist and therapist in New York and has a very important YouTube channel that you should be following. And that'll be next Sunday, August 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. here in Israel. But if you register, you will get the link to the full webinar in your inbox, so you don't have to, the time doesn't have to be convenient for you, just if you want to watch it live. So make sure that you register for the webinar. You can register by going to www.israel365.com/Mamdani, israel365.com/Mamdani, or you can click on you can scan the QR code that's on your screen, or you can go to the website. Here, let me put that QR code back, or you can go to the link in the description of this video to register for that. So that's next Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You don't want to miss that. All right, God bless. Thanks for watching.